China is on track to surpass the United States as the world's largest air transport market by passenger traffic sometime in the early 2030s, and that shift changes everything. A market of that size won't just need more planes, it will demand thousands of new aircraft, especially long-range wide-body jets. For decades, Boeing has counted on China as one of the strongest pillars supporting its 787 Dreamliner program. But now that pillar is starting to crack. Quietly, steadily, and far faster than most expected. A new challenger is emerging, and it wasn't born in Silicon Valley or Seattle. It was born out of sanctions, isolation, and geopolitical pressure. It all began when Russia first moved into Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. Almost overnight, international sanctions tightened, cutting Moscow off from much of the global aerospace supply chain. Modern wide-body aircraft became difficult to purchase, harder to maintain, and nearly impossible to expand. Russian civil aviation, especially on long-haul international routes, was suddenly staring at a dangerous bottleneck. Flights between East and West faced an uncertain future. And in that uncertainty, a rare opportunity appeared. Behind closed doors, far from public attention, China and Russia began working on a joint solution. The project was called CR929, later renamed C929. On paper, it looked like a perfect match. China would bring massive financing, manufacturing capacity, and a rapidly growing domestic market. Russia would contribute decades of aerospace experience, aerodynamic research, and wide-body design expertise. The goal was bold, a 280-seat long-range aircraft built to compete, head-to-head with the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350, not just regionally, but globally. For both countries, this wasn't simply business. It was survival. But alliances built under pressure often carry hidden fractures. As the years passed, cracks began to show. Then came 2021. The conflict in Ukraine escalated dramatically, and by 2022, the partnership unraveled completely. Russia withdrew from the program, leaving the C929 in a cloud of uncertainty. Official explanations were vague, but rumors spread fast. Some reports claimed China demanded full access to Russia's engine technology, something Moscow refused outright. Others suggested Russian aerospace engineers were urgently redirected toward defense projects, draining the program of its core technical talent. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The joint venture collapsed. From the outside, it looked like the end. Western analysts were quick to dismiss the project. Without Russian support, many believed China had no chance of finishing a true wide-body jet on its own. The assumption was simple. Narrow-body planes were one thing, but wide-bodies were a completely different league. And then, almost out of nowhere, China answered. In February, COMAC made a stunning announcement. The C929 had officially entered flight testing, now described as an aircraft built with entirely independent intellectual property. Even more surprising, it already had its first confirmed customer. Air China placed an early order before the aircraft was anywhere near certification. For many observers, that decision raised eyebrows. Why commit so early? What did Air China see that others didn't? Executives hinted that the reasons went far beyond price or performance. And once the technical details started leaking, the picture became much clearer. This wasn't a scaled-up version of the C919. The C929 was a clean-sheet design, purpose-built for ultra-long-haul routes, with seating for around 280 passengers and a range of roughly 12,000 kilometers. It was designed to fly missions like Beijing to New York or Shanghai to London without compromise. Structurally, it stepped into the same category as the Dreamliner and the A350. More than 50% of the airframe is made from carbon fiber composites, matching Western wide-body standards and far exceeding the C919's composite usage. Add in roughly 15% titanium alloys, and the result is a lighter, stronger structure optimized for efficiency. That efficiency isn't just theoretical. A lighter airframe means lower fuel burn, reduced emissions, and lower operating costs. On paper, the C929 positions itself as one of the most environmentally efficient wide-body aircraft ever designed. But what truly caught experts off guard wasn't just performance, it was comfort. The C929 features a wingspan of nearly 65 meters, even wider than the 787, demanding advanced aerodynamic balancing to maintain stability and efficiency. Inside, the cabin width stretches to about 5.5 meters, noticeably wider than both the Dreamliner and the A350. That extra space translates directly into a better passenger experience. Wider seats, broader aisles, and a less cramped feeling on flights that can last 15 hours or more. For airlines competing on long-haul comfort, that difference matters. Beyond the cabin layout, COMAC packed the aircraft with modern systems. A highly digital cockpit, intelligent lighting that adapts to reduced jet lag, flexible cabin configurations, and a real-time health monitoring system capable of diagnosing issues mid-flight, with more than 2 million individual components and thousands of completed test assemblies. The C929 is as much a software-driven machine as it is a physical one. This wasn't just China building a plane. It was China announcing it wanted a seat at the top table of global aviation. Air China made that symbolism explicit. As the nation's flag carrier, the airline described the purchase as a patriotic responsibility. Integrating a domestically developed wide-body into its fleet wasn't just about operations. It was about national identity and long-term strategy. The message was clear. China wasn't content with assembling aircraft anymore. It wanted to define them. Still, skepticism remained. Many critics asked the same question. Is this really a made-in-China aircraft? And that doubt wasn't entirely unfounded. Despite COMAC C's emphasis on independence, REPORTS revealed that the C929 still relied heavily on Western suppliers. Deals with French and American aerospace firms covered systems like braking, oxygen control, and sensors. Out of 9 core avionics suppliers, fewer than half were domestic. In the short term, this approach made sense. Proven Western components meant higher reliability, faster development, and a smoother path toward international certification. But the risks were obvious. Dependence on foreign technology meant vulnerability. Export controls, sanctions, or political pressure could disrupt production at any moment. The C919 had already shown how fragile that dependency could be, and without full ownership of key intellectual property. The C929 risked being labeled a hybrid rather than a truly independent aircraft. For China's long-term ambitions, that label was unacceptable. So COMAC made its most aggressive move yet. The answer came in the form of an engine. The CJ2000, China's first domestically developed high bypass turbofan designed specifically for wide-body aircraft. More than just a power plant, it represents a turning point. With planned flight trials around 2029, the CJ2000 is intended to rival engines like the Rolls-Royce, Trent 1000, and GE's GEnx. Delivering up to 35 tons of thrust, it matches Western benchmarks while reportedly offering a 5 to 7% improvement in fuel efficiency. Physically, the engine is massive. A 3-meter fan diameter, advanced composite blades, next-generation cooling systems, and noise suppression technologies designed to reduce cabin vibration and sound levels. At cruise, fuel consumption is lower than many current competitors, giving airlines an edge on long routes where every percentage point matters. For China, the implications are enormous. Achieving engine independence is something even established aerospace nations have struggled with. If the CJ2000 succeeds, it transforms the C929 from an ambitious project into a fully self-reliant challenger. It breaks the final chain tying China's commercial aviation dreams to Western approval. And that's why Boeing should be paying close attention. China's domestic market alone is large enough to sustain the C929 for decades. Add political preference, supply chain security, and rising global tensions, and the appeal becomes obvious. For airlines seeking alternatives to Western manufacturers, a competitive Chinese widebody could be game-changing, especially one designed from the ground up to challenge the 787 Dream. If COMAC delivers on performance, reliability, and certification, the impact could ripple far beyond China. The C929 wouldn't just take orders, it would redefine competition. It would signal that the era of unquestioned Western dominance in wide-body aviation is no longer guaranteed, and if that happens, the aircraft threatening Boeing's future in China won't be a rumor anymore. It'll be flying, and that's where the story gets even more interesting. Because the real danger to Boeing isn't just that China might build a capable wide-body aircraft, It's where that aircraft will fly first, who will operate it, and why those decisions could quietly lock Western manufacturers out of the most important aviation market on Earth. For decades, China's airlines relied on a delicate balance. Boeing and Airbus supplied the jets, while China focused on growth, infrastructure, and scale. But that balance was built on trust and access. Once sanctions, export controls, and political pressure entered the equation, that trust became conditional. Every delayed part, every regulatory hurdle, every reminder that critical systems could be switched off from abroad reinforced the same conclusion inside China's aviation circles. Dependence is a risk they can no longer afford. That's why the C929 doesn't need to conquer the world overnight to be disruptive. It only needs to dominate at home. And that shift, once it starts, doesn't announce itself with headlines. It happens quietly, one fleet decision at a time, one route assignment at a time, one procurement policy rewritten behind closed doors. By the time outside observers realize what's happening, the numbers will already tell the story. Fewer Dreamliners delivered to China, fewer long-term service agreements renewed, fewer future options on the table. What makes this moment especially dangerous for Boeing is that it's not just competing with another aircraft, it's competing with a national strategy. The C929 sits at the intersection of industrial policy, geopolitical security, and long-term economic planning. That gives it a kind of momentum Western manufacturers simply don't have. Boeing answers to shareholders, COMAC answers to a national roadmap, and once that roadmap is in motion, it doesn't easily reverse. Training pipelines begin shifting toward domestic platforms. Maintenance hubs are optimized around Chinese aircraft. Universities and research centers align their programs with national designs. Over time, the entire talent ecosystem begins orbiting around one idea. At that point, even if foreign aircraft remain technically superior in some areas, they start to feel like outsiders in a system that no longer needs them. There's also a psychological factor at play. For years, Chinese aviation watched from the sidelines as Western manufacturers set the rules. The C929 represents something different. It's proof, at least internally, that China can play the same game at the highest level. That confidence matters. Because once a country believes it belongs in a space, it invests differently. It takes risks. It commits long-term, and it stops asking for permission. Critics will point out the obvious challenges. Certification outside China will be slow. Trust from foreign airlines will take time. Early production rates may be limited. All of that is true, but none of it stops the C929 from succeeding where it matters most right now. At home, in the fastest-growing aviation market on Earth. And history is full of examples where dominance shifted not because one product was instantly better, but because the environment changed, because access changed, because priorities changed. The wide-body market may be approaching one of those moments. If China locks in its long-haul future around a domestic aircraft, the implications ripple outward. Suppliers adjust. Competitors respond. Alliances shift. Suddenly, Boeing isn't just defending market share. It's defending relevance in a region that will define aviation growth for decades. That's why the C929 isn't just a plane, it's leverage. It's insurance. It's a message sent to the world's aerospace giants that China no longer wants to rent the future of its skies. And if that message holds, the biggest threat to the 787 Dreamliner won't come from a single breakthrough or dramatic failure. It will come from a slow, deliberate redirection of an entire market, one that Boeing may not be able to stop. Because when China finally decides, it no longer needs an outside supplier for its most important aircraft. The decision won't be debated in public. It will already be made. And by then, the conversation around global aviation will sound very different. Instead of asking whether China can build a competitive widebody, analysts will be asking how quickly others can respond to a world where China already has one. The C929 will no longer be framed as an experiment or an ambition. It will simply be part of the landscape. What's especially striking is how fast this shift has unfolded. Less than 2 decades ago, China was assembling aircraft designed elsewhere. Today, it's fielding a long-range widebody with its own airframe, its own production line, and soon, its own engine. That trajectory matters, because aerospace isn't a sprint. It's a marathon built on iteration, learning, and scale. Once a country enters that cycle, it rarely exits. For Boeing, this creates an uncomfortable reality. The 787 Dreamliner was designed to dominate long-haul travel for a generation, and in many markets, it still does. But dominance only works when the playing field stays the same. China's rise as both the largest customer and a direct competitor reshapes that field entirely. Losing share in smaller markets is painful. Losing influence in the largest one is existential. And this isn't about ideology or pride alone. It's about leverage. Aircraft orders translate into political influence, industrial partnerships, and long-term dependency. For decades, that leverage sat firmly with Western manufacturers. The C929 represents China's attempt to take some of it back, not through confrontation, but through substitution. If the aircraft proves reliable, efficient, and scalable, the question won't be whether it replaces the 787 everywhere. It won't. The question will be whether Boeing can afford a future where China no longer needs it. Because once that need disappears, so does bargaining power. That's why the early 2030s will be remembered as a turning point. Not necessarily because one aircraft outperformed another, but because the structure of the market changed. The center of gravity shifted east, and with it, the rules of competition. So the next time you hear about a quiet order placed, a new route announced, or a domestic aircraft entering service without much fanfare, pay close attention. Those small signals often precede much bigger changes, because the real story of the C929 isn't just about a plane challenging the 787. It's about a future where the skies are no longer shaped by a single group of manufacturers. And once that future arrives, there's no going back. And that's the part many people still underestimate. Aviation dominance has never been permanent. It only feels that way until it isn't. Every era has a moment when control quietly shifts. Not through collapse, but through accumulation, small decisions stacking up. Long-term plans locking into place, confidence growing where doubt once lived. The C929 fits that pattern perfectly. It doesn't need dramatic headlines or instant global adoption. It just needs time. Time to mature. Time to scale. Time to normalize the idea that a Chinese-built widebody belongs on the world's longest routes. And once that idea takes hold, perceptions follow faster than most expect. For Boeing, the danger isn't a sudden loss. It's a gradual narrowing of options. Fewer strategic partnerships. Less influence over fleet planning in Asia. A shrinking role in shaping the future of long-haul aviation where growth actually exists. By the time those effects show up in balance sheets, the decisions causing them will already be years old. And for the rest of the world, this marks something bigger than competition. It marks a rebalancing, a signal that aerospace, once dominated by a handful of Western giants, is entering a new phase, one where capability, scale, and political alignment matter just as much as legacy and reputation. So whether the C929 becomes a global bestseller or remains primarily a domestic powerhouse, its impact is already being felt. It has changed expectations. It has altered strategies. And it has forced every major manufacturer to rethink what the future might look like. Because the question is no longer whether China can challenge the wide-body market. That question has already been answered. The real question now is how the rest of the industry adapts to a future where China is no longer just buying aircraft, but shaping the direction of global aviation itself. And once that future fully arrives, it won't feel sudden at all. It will feel inevitable. And inevitability is the most powerful force in aviation. Once airlines, regulators, and suppliers begin planning around a future they believe is unavoidable, momentum takes over. Investment follows belief. Infrastructure follows investment. And soon, the ecosystem reshapes itself to support whatever that belief centers on. That's exactly what makes the C929 such a pivotal development. It has already crossed the hardest psychological barrier, being taken seriously. Even its critics no longer ask if it will exist. They ask when it will mature. That shift alone changes how Boeing, Airbus, and the entire supply chain must think about the next 20 to 30 years for Boeing's 787 Dreamliner. This means the competitive pressure isn't just technical anymore. It's structural. China doesn't need to outperform the Dreamliner across every metric to change the outcome. It only needs to ensure that future decisions, especially inside Asia, don't default to Western aircraft by habit. And once that habit breaks, regaining it is extraordinarily difficult. What's unfolding now is a quiet decoupling. Not a clean break, not a dramatic confrontation, but a gradual reorientation. One where China builds redundancy into its aviation future. One where foreign aircraft become options, not necessities. And in global industries, losing necessity is the first step toward losing dominance. Years from now, people may look back at this period and realize the turning point wasn't a maiden flight or a certification announcement. It was a series of strategic choices made long before the aircraft ever entered widespread service. Choices about independence, about resilience, about control, because in aviation, the most important battles are rarely fought in the sky. They're fought on whiteboards, in boardrooms, and in long-term plans that don't make headlines until it's far too late. And by the time the world fully sees the C929 for what it represents, the future it was designed for may already be locked in.